Hello, and welcome to Model Aviation Live. I'm your host, Jay Smith, executive editor of Model Aviation magazine. If you're watching live, today is November 15th, and I want to share with you that I just returned at the end of October. I went to a trip to Chicago to visit a few of our advertisers or potential advertisers. We have a lot of hobby companies in the Chicago area, so I always enjoy getting up there. The first time I ever went to Chicago was back in 1991. I've been there a handful of times. A lot of great things in Chicago. I've been there for Doctor Who conventions. I've been there for pinball expos, but obviously it's fun to go there for the hobby as well. So the first stop on my trip was actually in O'Hare, which obviously is right next to the O'Hare Airport, where I saw the new SIG Manufacturing. So Herb is there with me next to the sign. He also owns Plastruct and Evergreen scale models. So his plan had always been to move SIG from Iowa to Chicago area, the O'Hare area, so he could have all companies under the same roof. He's got a really, really nice facility, and they had actually put an extension on and built more onto it to house all of SIG. So everything's being made right there. They're up and running. They're cutting 4 new kits. Well, older kits, but they have a laser cutter going, and they're getting all their products back in stock. They've gotten in containers of ARFs, and they're getting like covering material and tools and all that stuff all back in stock. So one thing to note that Herb told me is apparently they were unable to transfer the phone number that they had for years and years in Iowa to Chicago. So the phone number has changed. So if you try to call SIG and it's disconnected, it's not because they're gone. It's because the phone number changed. So if you just go to SIG Manufacturing's website, you can get the updated phone number. They've also updated their website with all these new products, new line of tools. All the stuff that's getting back in stock is being updated on the website. So be sure to check out the website. From there, I went and visited my next stop right here. I'm here with Mike from Gator RC, and so I met with Mike and his daughter and his wife. All of them run the company. It's a family business, so I got to meet them. First time I think I'd met Mike, I believe, before either at Joe Nall or at AMA, but it was the first time that I got to go to their facility and see. So this is obviously their warehouse, and see some of the neat stuff. They have a lot of neat jets and a lot of great products that they're going to be bringing to the market. I interviewed them for an About Us just a few months ago, where they kindly gave away a Corsair. So that was really exciting. So it was great to go ahead and visit them. And then from there, I went and visited Motion RC. Now, Motion is almost to the Wisconsin state line. They're actually in Gurnee, which is also where Six Flags is. Now, I didn't unfortunately have time to go to Six Flags and ride the roller coasters, but right in the same town, Gurnee, Illinois, is a Six Flags. That's, like I said, very close to the state line of Wisconsin. It's about 45 minutes from Lake Geneva, birthplace of Dungeons and Dragons, which I visited last year. So, I mean, it's really north, but, only an hour and a half or maybe a couple hours max from Chicago. So the last time I visited them, they were just outside of Wheeling, in the Chicago area, and they doubled the size of their warehouse. So, really huge warehouse at this point. And they also have a small showroom when you first go in that they show off some of their models. Interestingly, I believe that Motion RC is the only hobby company that I know of that sells Lego. And that's because Mark, right there in the picture, I mean, at least partially, because he's a big Lego fan. They also sell another brand of building blocks that focuses on tanks and aircraft, because I guess that, that's not something Lego usually delves into. So I ended up picking up from him a Fokker DR1 Red Baron. So it comes with a Red Baron minifig and the airplane. I haven't built it yet. But very reasonably priced, like $34.99. But so if you are interested in Legos, or I think it's Kobe or Corby that makes the DR1. I meant to bring it in my office, sorry, so I could show it to you. But anyway, so that was a really nice visit as well. So it was great to get up there and see them. I'd promised Herb that I would visit SIG once they moved from Iowa, because I'd been to the Iowa location a couple times. I covered the last SIG fly-in and Hazel SIG's 100th birthday. So it was nice to see his location. I thought, it'd be a great opportunity to visit a few of the others. Now there's a few others beyond the ones I visited. There's a few other hobby companies like Dubrow, and I've been there previously, but I only had 3 days total, and that was including, well, actually 4, right? Wednesday, Thursday, Friday, Saturday, 4, but that was including my drive up and my drive back. And I did get to actually meet and have lunch with a friend who I don't get to see very often, and he actually worked, he was a programmer for pinball machines, and he worked for Bally and Midway. He actually programmed the Doctor Who pinball machine. He also was the programmer for the game Joust, the video game. So it was great to catch up with him. And I'll share with you really quick. He did give me the one thing I was missing. It's right here. I mean, we'll delve away from airplanes just for a second. But the one thing I was missing, the Doctor Who, let me get the right hand out of the way. Doctor Who pinball bumper sticker. I never break for Daleks. This is the only promotional item I don't have, or didn't have, sorry, for the Doctor Who pinball machine. Because as you know, I have that. I have the Doctor Who pinball machine, and I like pinball and arcade machines. So that was cool too. It was all work related, but I did get to have lunch with a friend of mine, Bill. So, but enough about the trip. I'm really excited to have Paul Kohlmann on the show again. Paul has been on the show previously. Hopefully, you've been reading his articles about the P40 that he designed. The third installment is in the December issue that just released less than an hour ago digitally. And obviously, if you get print, you're going to be waiting maybe a week or a little over a week. But I wanted to bring him on the show and talk about the P40, and we're going to show the article. And, he has the plane there if he wants to show anything. So let's welcome Paul to the show.
Hey, Jay.
Hi,
good
Paul.
to see you again.
Good to see you. Obviously excited to have you on the show. You've done a lot of build and construction articles, going all the way back to the Grumman Goose that we talked about, and obviously Glenn Lewis, a friend of mine that I used to fly with in Florida, used to race RC cars with him when I was a kid, 6-7 years old. He connected me with you. Grumman Goose went on to become the bestseller in the history of our planned service. So before we jump into the P40, why don't you share your newest project behind you that you're hoping will have similar success?
Yeah, well, I'm finishing up the framework on a 60-inch Grumman Widgeon. And this is kind of funny in the sense that the Goose in real life is bigger than a Widgeon, but the Goose that's in your plans collection is it has a wingspan of 49 inches, so it's actually smaller than my Widgeon. But the Goose in 2012, to me, a 49-inch airplane was pretty big at that time. But my projects have grown, so the size order is a little out of whack now. But the Widgeon will be constructed very similarly to the Goose, so it should be it'll come out very lightweight, kind of a stick and tissue type of construction. And yeah, I'm looking forward to seeing it fly. It shouldn't be a whole lot longer now. Like I said, the framework's already done, and just got to put the guts in it and cover it. But it'll be interesting to see if it's as popular as the Goose.
Absolutely. I think it will be. I think that's another really cool amphibious design, and I think the how well the Goose did surprised everyone, but that was great. So I'm excited when you get that done and we can have that in the magazine. We also have another announcement to make about something else you'll be working on, but let's save that till the end of the show. Since we've already shared one, let's wait and share the other one at the end. So let's dive into your P40. So we'll share all 3 articles, but before we do, so you can talk a little bit about that. But why don't you just kind of talk about, I mean, it wasn't your first P40, so talk about what led you to design this one, and what's any challenges you had, or maybe things you learned from the first one. Just kind of give us an idea of what led to this project.
Yeah, well, this one kind of fell out of another project. Actually, if you'll recall, a few years ago, Derek Micco and we did a fighter face-off that we wrote articles for Model Aviation. And that project, each of us picked a World War II fighter that had faced one another in combat. Derek picked the I-16 Rada, and I picked the P-36 Hawk. So the P-36 really was the basis for the P-40. The P-36 was powered by a radial engine, and the earliest P-40s were literally P-36s that just had a big Allison inline engine bolted on and some new sheet metal from the firewall forward. So as a project, it was very simple. I just went back to CAD and just designed a new nose and reworked the kit. So now, folks that are interested in building one of these kits can either order a P-36 or a P-40. In my case, I was working with the hybrid. One of the prototypes that didn't get all the way finished became the P-40. And so it flies very similarly. It's a little more streamlined, so it's slippery when it comes in for landing. But who doesn't like a P-40? I mean, they're just such iconic aircraft, and some people like the later ones better, but in my case, the earliest ones are just the most gorgeous, and I'm pretty pleased. That's mine as a P-40C model.
I was looking at the comments, and I see we have a scale modeler that most people will probably be familiar with. Mike Barbie is watching the program today, so thanks for joining, Mike. And we've got Howard Dixon has joined and made a comment, and we've got Victor RC Jets. So thank you all for commenting and tuning in live to the show. So do you want to go ahead, Paul, and we'll put up the first article, then the second article, and the third article, and you can kind of talk us through it a little bit?
Sure. Yeah. So I'm sorry, I just got a low battery warning. I should have thought of that. The first article is focused on the framework for the most part. So it is a balsa kind of stick and tissue type construction. So talk about the basics on how to get the framework put together. This one is very similar to the P-36. So I try to focus on things that weren't covered in the earlier series. And if you'll bear with me one sec, I'm going to plug this phone in.
No problem. So as I had mentioned while Paul's plugging in his phone, that P-40, he did a smaller version of this previously. Obviously, he builds models in many different sizes. But I myself, growing up, was a huge fan of the P-40. I always liked the Flying Tigers shark's mouth that was on their aircraft, and I actually got to go to a Flying Tigers reunion at Fantasy of Flight, and they had about 18 people, not just pilots, but they had their nurse was there and some other people and family, and it was really neat to get to talk to them. And I took an art print that showed Ken Jernstadt's aircraft, and he was there, and I got all of the attendees to sign that. And Kermit Weeks' Fantasy of Flight down in Florida is amazing, and there was no extra charge to attend this reunion. And Kermit has a dual seat P-40, and he took up every one of the pilots, every P-40 pilot that was at the reunion, he took up one by one, and his dual seat P-40, which was just an incredible experience for them, I think, to fly again. And Tex Hill was the last one. He was the last person, the last pilot that they took up for a ride. And so it was really neat. They did a question and answer session. They signed autographs. And I remember one of the P-40 pilots, his wife said that he had practiced his signature for 3 days before the event because he, had some ill health, and he hadn't written much, and he had some health issues, and he wanted to make sure he could give everyone a good autograph. So he practiced his autographs for 3 days before the reunion. Unfortunately, if I'm not mistaken, I don't think there's any of the American pilots left. I think there are some pilots that flew with them from other countries, but I think every American pilot has since passed away. But it was quite an experience.
I always wonder what those fellows feel like when they get the opportunity to do one of those rides. They must just be dying to grab a hold of the sticks and take over.
Yeah, I can imagine. I also found out, some people don't know this, but Pappy Boyington was part of the AVG before he became famous flying Corsairs, and they don't like him. The AVG pilots do not like him. That definitely came across in the presentation and question and answer session. So that was interesting. But teach their own, I guess. So, okay. Now that you've got your power cord plugged in, if you want to tell us anything more about the construction that was covered in this first article.
It gets a lot more interesting as we move forward, to be honest. We had to set a foundation by getting the framework done, but then we talked about more of the details on the second article. Actually, one thing I'll comment on, this is somewhat polarizing perhaps, but in this project, I did more infilling of the nose of the aircraft in particular, but there's some discussion at the end of the article where infilling is adding balsa in between the stringers, which seems counterintuitive perhaps. Why would you build an open structure and then fill it up? But the thought process there is some areas benefit from that by being strengthened. For instance, anywhere around where the firewall is, it's beneficial. Some areas that have a tight radius, particularly a compound radius, it's beneficial also, where you can avoid that, what people refer to as the starved horse look, where the covering would sag a little bit when it's spanned across a compound curve. So the nose of this aircraft has a lot of infilling so that it looks more like a sheet metal cowl, and then the rest of the framework is left open where the radius is a bit bigger and the covering doesn't sag as much, and the strength isn't required. So it's not necessary, it doesn't have to be done, but it just depends. It's the builder's choice on compromise between adding a little weight and making the aircraft look a little more scale.
We also had someone join us, Gerald Baggs from Florida. Gerald, I don't know if you were the gentleman who commented right at the end of the show last time. We didn't have a show last month because that Friday was my birthday, and then I was leaving for Chicago. But the show that we had in September, a gentleman commented that he flew at the Largo Flying Club. So I don't know if that was you, obviously Largo, Florida, but it was right as we were closing. I mean, I was closing the show. We were closing the show, and I saw this comment about the Largo Flying Club, and I wanted to mention that I used to fly at the Largo Flying Club. I'm from Florida. I was born in St. Petersburg, and Largo Flying Club was the closest flying club to me. So it's not you, but there was someone watching who mentioned the Largo Flying Club. So I wanted to mention on the next show that we did that I actually used to fly at the Largo Flying Club because I lived in Seminole, which is the next town over from Largo. And interestingly, so I sold my house in Seminole, Florida, and moved to Muncie, Indiana. And when Dave Brown retired, who used to be our president and owned Dave Brown Products, he retired to Seminole, Florida. And I thought, how weird is that? And he didn't know I used to live there. And then I found out that he moved to Seminole, Florida. So it turns out that he only lived about 2 miles from the house that I sold to move to Muncie. That's where he retired to. And so I had planned to go and see him the next time I was there to visit family, but sadly he passed before I made it down. But, just a very, interesting coincidence that he moved to the same small city that I moved from to work for AMA. And he did the opposite, retired there. Small world. Yeah, exactly. Well, let's jump into your second article.
Yeah, so the second article, you can see from the photo there, we've got some covering on the airplane. The rudder's painted. It's a lot easier to paint something that requires a bit of masking like that. So that was painted before it was hung. Let's see, what else do we have in there, Jay? Oh, so this was something new for me. The P-36 that spawned this project, all of the linkages were kept internal. It has a pull rudder, and the elevator linkage is buried inside of the fuselage. So there's no linkages hanging out except for the ailerons. And I thought about it. It's not awful, but it'd be nice to eliminate those as well. So I tried something that was new to me. It's not new really, but there's a system. It's called the rotary drive system, and it's been used particularly for gliders for a long time. So I didn't invent anything here, but I tried it out for this project, and the way that it works is instead of using a lever arm on the servo that's operating another lever arm that's on the aileron, instead the servo, you're using the twist of the servo to twist a bent rod, and the bend in the rod offers a deflection that can be used to move a control surface. And so there's some discussion of that at the beginning of the article where I show how I use that to operate the ailerons in this P40. And the neat part about it is there's a door to cover the servo, and that's held down with some magnets. So there's no fasteners or anything, but there's no linkage exposed. And it's a really tight linkage. So I was really pleased with how it came out. In my case, I just silver soldered some parts together. So it was a pretty cheap thing to do. It's a really neat setup. So I definitely recommend it, and we'll use it again. We also talk about the landing gear. This airplane and the P-36, the retracts are taken from the FMS 55-inch P-40. The gear for that airplane is scaled a little bit big, actually, so it fits this bigger P-40 just perfectly. You can order those retracts as spares. They come with the wheels, and they have a sprung oleo. They're neat parts, but once they're installed, you need landing gear doors to cover them. And there's a fair amount of discussion about how I put the doors together for this airplane. The hinges are pretty simple. They're just made with music wire and some aluminum tubing. But there's little teeny springs that pop the doors open, and the springs were hand wound from guitar strings.
Oh,
yeah, it's just you just take a piece of guitar string and just wrap it around a drill bit, and the more wraps you put on your spring, the softer it gets. And of course, you got to adjust the tension by which string you pick, what the diameter of the wire is. But that makes the doors pop open. And then to close them, there's a bit of Kevlar line that goes from the door to the internal of the wing. And when the strut closes, it presses up against that Kevlar line and pulls the door shut behind the strut as it retracts. So actually, I've got a few emails on that, just how that stuff was done. And the trick, of course, with these articles is you can only put so many words and so many photos in an article, and you're trying to make it interesting and cover a fair amount of ground, but not make it just a scattergun of topics with no substance to them. But I was encouraged to consider writing an article that was dedicated just towards how to deal with landing gear doors and such. Not that I have all the answers, but I've done a couple of these projects and I'm pretty happy with these types of results. So definitely considering writing that up.
great. I think you should.
Well, good.
We'll find out what your string size preference is for guitar strings, because if you buy a pack, you get 6 strings. So I'm be curious to hear what your preference is.
That's good to have options.
Yeah.
To be honest, I don't remember. I think it's listed there in the article, but I don't remember off the top of my head, to be honest.
Well, speaking of guitars and music, we also had Howard Dixon join us. He's in Nashville, Tennessee. And Mr. Gerald Baggs, I actually spoke to him today. He just reminded me about the P40 out of foam. He wants to build your P40, but he wants to use foam. And he talked to me today. So you might find this interesting, Paul, because I know, obviously we offer all the plans for free download, but Gerald he downloaded your plan off our website and he took it to Staples to get it printed. And they told him they wouldn't print it because there was a copyright on it by AMA, and that the only way they would print it is if he had a letter from us saying that he it was okay to print it. And he said, but it's on their website for download. And they said, you have to have a letter. So he called me and I called him back today. And so I wrote him an email and, stating, that, he has permission to publish this plan, because it's on our website as a free download. So I've never in 17 years heard of a Staples, refusing to print something. And it's unfortunate for Gerald because, then he had to come home and have me send him an email. But I mean, I guess it's, in a way, it's good that at least some people are mindful about that.
It's good. It's pretty hit or miss. I hear that from time to time, and I guess it really depends on who you run into at the store that day. But they are trying to do the right thing, because the truth of the matter is, people's plans do get knocked off pretty frequently, and it happens. But copying a paper plan really isn't that big of a problem from my perspective. But yeah, they're trying to do the right thing.
Fun Scale Model says an article about the gear doors would be great. So I think you've just been committed to that article.
All right. I think I know who that is. That would be Derek.
That would be, yes. And he was on the show just recently as well. So we're going to delve into the third part now. And you might want to go a little more in depth on the third part, because probably the majority of people haven't seen it at all.
Oh, that's true.
Yeah.
Yeah. So let's see. You'll have to refresh my memory as we scroll up a little bit. I'll warm up to it. But here it is, finished. And to be honest, I don't want to pat myself on the back necessarily, but this particular project, I really love the P40. I have as long as I can remember. This particular P40 that I modeled was stationed down in Novato, which is just a few miles down the road from me, Novato, California. And we also had an Army Air Base that was here in Santa Rosa, where I live. And the Army airplanes bounce back and forth between Oakland and Novato and Santa Rosa a lot. So there's not a doubt in my mind that this particular airplane flew right over my house. We're literally on the glide path. So I love the P40. I love the early P40s, and this one just really resonated with me. So I put in the extra effort and did more detailing than I normally do. And I'm just really pleased with how it turned out. So when I went out to the airfield, that actually, unfortunately, we just lost the airfield where these pictures were taken. But I just love the pictures that came out. It was a perfect day. The sky was just gorgeous, and the weather was ideal for photography. And I'm just really pleased with how this airplane turned out. Callie did the graphics for me, and as usual, she did a fantastic job. So really, really pleased with how it turned out. So as far as the article goes, we start in with some more retracts. Again, I use the retracts that came out of that FMS P40. They're just a great fit. Talk a little bit about how to get the steering to work for the tail wheel. Here you also see a few photos of how that linkage was done. I mentioned earlier that the elevator linkage is hidden within the fuselage, so there's some discussion as to how that was done. And the P40 is a bit different than a P36. Both aircraft have a belly pan, but the belly pan is shaped differently, and it's much longer on a P40. So I went into a little bit more discussion and how the P40 was done, since it was different than the earlier articles. But it's got a basic framework, and then that framework is planked with strips of balsa to close it up, and then it's held on with a pin and some magnets. We talk a little bit about how those side windows are done. The side windows that are very, very specific to the P36 and the P40. They're one of the defining features. And then, of course, on the nose end of that airplane, the spinner and those Allison exhaust stacks, those are, if they're not right, that P40 is not going to look good. So in this case, those parts, the spinner and stacks, and also a instrument panel, are all available as free downloads on Thingiverse. So most of my projects these days have at least a couple of 3D printed parts. And so folks can download those parts and use them for whatever they'd like to use them for. But for this project, they fit this P40 perfectly. They're literally designed for it. And then down at the bottom, you see that fateful day when we took the maiden flight. And to be honest, the maiden flight was done before the paint went on. I usually do that just in case, because who wants to spend a ton of time painting and detailing and then drilling a hole in the ground? But luckily, that unpainted maiden went really nicely, so we got the paint on. And I got my buddy Paul Gibson, who's a fantastic photographer, out to the field with me, and we got one flight in, and it was one of those flights where the airplane just flew so well. It took a little trimming, not a whole lot, but it flew great, and we were getting good pictures. And we kept thinking, we just need to take one more pass, and we did that until we used about the last electron in that battery pack. And so the landing was a bit hairy, and that was all my fault. I just didn't watch the time, but certainly not the airplanes. But I ended up having to land the airplane a little bit across the runway instead of down it. And she came in pretty hard, and I broke one of the main gear. So she's still sitting on the hood of the car waiting for some repairs. There's been other projects in the way, but certainly not the airplane's fault. But all in all, it was a good day, and the damage was minor. And Paul got some fantastic pictures. I was just really pleased.
If the plane's sitting on the hood of the car, I'm assuming that's not a car you drive that often.
Well, no, I have a surplus of projects. Actually, I have a 67 Cougar that's sitting across the garage from me that I bought when I was 21.
Oh, wow.
And if you look at the color of my hair, you know that means I've owned that car a long time. So, yeah, it's that car's been, I probably moved it to 5 different houses, and it's a project that still isn't finished, but yeah, that's someday.
So, I always like to ask when we do have someone on the show that has done a construction article, give us some, some people that are watching have flown P40, some haven't. You talked about how well it flew, but maybe if you could just give a little feedback if someone does complete this project, any tips for successful maiden or successful flying or things to look out for.
Yeah, that's a good question. This one does fly differently than the P36. Probably not surprisingly when you think on it, but the nose is a lot longer, so it's pretty easy to get the CG on it. But since the nose is so long, it has a lot more leverage. And if you just firewall it trying to take off, it'll just rotate right into the ground, and you just won't get very far. So you need to be a little more cautious with the elevator, and just roll the power on, and stay on the rudder, keep it lined up. But once it gets moving, it was easy to maintain a level attitude just with the elevator, and then get the speed up, and then just give it a little backstick, and she just lifted right off. But there's definitely a tendency to nose over if you're in a hurry. So that would be my number one advice. Otherwise, I was really surprised. I said that my friend Paul Gibson was with me, and we want to go as slow as we can and get as close as we can reasonably for the photographer's sake. But it got to the point where Paul was getting pretty nervous that the airplane was going to stall, because we were coming in pretty slow in some of the passes. But these airplanes have really light wing loadings, so they as long as you keep that stick and tissue mentality, these airplanes are pretty light for their size. It's significantly lighter than the FMS foamy version, but they're very forgiving. They have pretty gentle stall characteristics. And this one I did put flaps on, which definitely nice when it's coming in for a landing, because they're really floaty. But yeah, that's my biggest advice, I suppose, is if the flaps are neat, not an absolute necessity. They're actually kind of an extracurricular activity. It's not in the plan per se, but yeah.
Gerald, that I mentioned earlier, he put that he's planning to build it out of foam, specifically foam board, and he wanted to know if you had any comments on that.
Yeah, actually, I think that sounds like a great project. I've helped a couple of guys that wanted to do that. I did a Devastator a few years ago, and I pulled some of the cross sections for the fuse and the wing to help out John Morgan. He built a foam Devastator that was gorgeous, as pretty much all of John's projects were. And another fellow in Texas, he did one a little bit smaller at about the same time. The three of us were building our airplanes all using our own methods. So yeah, I think it's a great idea. My personal preference is to build in balsa, but really anybody that's building anything, regardless of how they're doing it, I think it's great. So yeah, consider and shoot me an email and let me know in more detail what you're doing. I'd be curious.
Also, we have Michael who says he can relate to the hood of the car. He has a 72 Chevelle in his garage, and he's watching from Orange Tree, Florida.
Well, good. I hope he gets a little more motivation to get going on a Chevelle. I'm assuming that means that we have our incomplete projects in common, but perhaps he's further than I am.
Well, I'm also part of that. Although mine is drivable, I have a 69 Camaro in my garage, and it's put up for the winter, and there's a moving blanket and a bunch of foamies sitting on the hood. I put a moving blanket over the hood and then put a bunch of foamies. So I've got about 4 or 5, Park Flyer foam aircraft sitting on the hood. So I'm part of that club as well.
Well, that's a nice car too.
Yeah. Well, it's a lot of space that's kind of wasted, right? So, put the planes on there. I mean, obviously they're very light. They're not going to hurt it.
Right.
So,
well, I've got mixed feelings on that. In the last, oh my gosh. Yeah, it's been 35 years, I guess, maybe a little more since I've owned this car. But yeah, my rule has generally been as soon as you start using it as a shelving unit, then that probably means that you've given up.
That's bad.
so I really try not to do that, but yeah, sometimes it happens.
Yeah, well, understandable, I guess. So, you mentioned obviously it needs some minor repairs, but it sounds like you'll have it back in the air pretty quick once you have the time to work on it.
Yeah, I will. Yeah, like I said, it's just I need to repair just one landing gear mount, and that's really all the damage that occurred. So it wasn't too bad.
So was there any? I mean, I know in the magazine, I mean, and you covered it obviously in the article for the P40, but you've done articles for us in the past about different techniques, and you did a whole segment, several articles about building. Was there any new techniques that you used on the P40 that you've not covered in the magazine before? Do you recall?
Really was focused. The new stuff for me was that RDS system we talked about a little bit. Otherwise, the covering and painting were very similar. And since it really was just a modification of the P36. This one wasn't exactly groundbreaking for me, but the project I'm working on now, the Widgeon, where it'll be like the Goose, of course, it'll be an amphibious airplane that flies off the water. I'm really curious about the use of polyspan. That's my favorite covering for now. Has been for quite a while. It's a fabric, and it's kind of a loosely woven fabric, and that doesn't really sound that compatible with an airplane that's going to get wet. But a number of my friends online have built the Goose and covered it with polyspan and built other amphibious airplanes, and when they're sealed properly, it seems to work fine. But I'm really curious how that's going to go. So I'm looking forward to getting a little further on the project and learning more about that.
Yeah.
Another thing is when I built the Goose, I didn't seal the framework. I had never built a water plane before. I didn't really give it that much thought, but it's a pretty good idea. There's some pinholes in the covering in the tail group that always get a little bit of water, and those control surfaces tend to warp a little bit. And so after I fly it, I actually use some clothespins and some scrap wood to flatten the elevators down as they dry out. So it's manageable, but if that would have been sealed properly, that is unlikely to be a problem. So the Goose will definitely get, or sorry, the Widgeon will definitely get sealed. So that's a learning. So not exactly groundbreaking new development, just things that I'm learning and applying.
Sure. Is there anything else that you want to say or share about the P40 and before we jump into the next project that we were going to share?
I think we covered quite a bit. So yeah, if anybody's interested in building that, they want to make sure they know that they can get the plastic parts. You just need to make a friend with a 3D printer if you don't have one, or a lot of libraries and such have those. Um, but there's other solutions. You could buy a spinner, but if you want one that fits perfectly, same thing with the exhaust stacks. Then yeah, some way somehow get a hold of some 3D printer time, and it'll be worth it.
And if they want a short kit, you can tell them where they can get that as well.
That's true. Thanks for that. So Tom Jacoby at Manzano Laser Works, he's marketing all of my designs along with another pretty good group of builders. There's actually some great builders that all have their designs on his site. So it's pretty safe to say that anything you could think of, whether it's jets all the way to World War I aircraft, he's got just dozens and dozens and dozens of really interesting projects available to peruse. And he does a great job. He's a fantastic partner.
Yes. And then we'll also mention your website since we're talking about websites.
Yeah, my website's kind of funny. It's kind of a scattering of photos of all the projects that I've done. You can take a look and just see if anything whets your interest. It's a funny website. Just you can't order anything from it directly, but it's just kind of a repository of information for projects that I've done. And that's infield engineering. And the infield engineering idea, you'll see from the logo, there's a softball field there. The idea is here in Sonoma County, where I live, the part of the county where I live, there's not a whole lot of open space. So really my forte is building these stick and tissue type airplanes that can be flown in a small space. So back in the day when I flew a lot more, I spent a lot of time just flying on the local softball fields. So that's kind of the goal. Even the 60-inch stuff, a little big for a softball field, but that's been the idea is keep the projects as light as possible so they can be flown in a smaller area. We just don't have as much open space as I think you do there in Muncie.
Yeah, that's probably fair since we have 1,100 acres.
That's a lot.
Yeah. So obviously your P40 project ran over 3 issues, October, November, and the December issue, which digital just came out today, wraps it. I do want to mention for everyone just to be aware that the January issue has Derek Micko's Corsair, which was voted on by the readers. And Derek is with us, not on the show live, but he is watching, and he's obviously has comments that he's making. So in the comments section. So we're really excited to share that with everyone. And, it was really neat for Derek to agree to let the readers decide his project. And then, as it worked out, you talked about Fighter Face Off, and that was a project that you and Derek did 2 times for us.
Right.
So for those that, need a refresher, just kind of take us through both of those 2 projects.
Yeah, I definitely will. Let me just comment real quickly, though. If you haven't seen Derek's
looks like you might have lost your connection there for a minute, so I'll give you a moment there, Paul. Well, we'll wait for a minute for Paul to come back. So I was going to have Paul share that there's been 2 fighter face-offs in the past. And what that was that Paul picked an aircraft and Derek picked an aircraft, and they were opposing aircraft, and they flew them together, so they designed them separately, but they, talked about which aircraft they would pick. And, So both of those times that they did that, one were larger aircraft. One time was larger aircraft, one time was smaller, more park-sized aircraft. But both times that the fighter face-off happened, those were World War II aircraft that were featured. So while we're waiting for Paul to come back, I will share that I'm excited that I've managed to, and it didn't take much convincing, but I managed to convince Paul and Derek to do a third fighter face-off. But this time, it's not going to be World War II. It's going to be World War One. So I'm really excited. I'm a huge fan of World War One aircraft. I've got a 6-scale Sopwith Pup right above me that would literally fall on my head. I have at least 4 World War One airplanes myself, and obviously it's very popular. You know, we have Dawn patrols all across the United States. In fact, I was just talking to the Dawn Patrol. I was talking to Scott, who runs the Dawn Patrol event down in Florida, and their event has gotten so big that they are actually moving it to Ocala, Florida this January because it got too big for their club field. So that's the Blue Max event. I went the first year. It was at Fantasy of Flight, and I went, and then they moved it to their club field, and now it's gotten so big that they're moving it to Ocala. So I'm really excited that Paul and Derek have agreed. So, you know, they'll be opposing aircraft. All right, we got you back, Paul?
Yeah, I'm sorry, Jay. I'm just struggling with the technical issues today, but yeah, it sounds like you let the cat out of the bag.
Yeah, so I mentioned it's World War One. I'll let you speak to anything more that you want to say about that.
Yeah, well, so far, Derek and I really concentrated more on World War II aircraft, and not entirely, but for the most part. But neither of us has done a World War One subject, so this will definitely be new ground for us. Uh, However, it's hard to find a subject that hasn't been grossly overmodeled when you're looking for World War II stuff. But World War One stuff, I mean, people have been modeling that for over a century. So that's been interesting. We've had a lot of dialogue in the last week or so, particularly, where we're really trying to hammer out what 2 aircraft we're going to do. We don't want to do yet another Sopwith Camel, probably. But then again, we don't want to do something that nobody's ever heard of and really won't have that much interest in. So it's been fun, and I'm not a World War One expert, so I really had no idea how many different airplanes were fielded in World War One, but it's a lot. It's really incredible. And of course, when you look at the airplanes that flew in 1915 versus 1918, just like World War II, the amount of development they had over the course of that relatively small period is really fascinating. So I'm glad that you threw that at us. It looks like it's going to be a lot of fun. It's definitely interesting, and we're both learning a lot.
Excellent. Well, I'm excited. Once you decide what the subject matter will be, I'm excited to hear about that. Mike Barbie just said he will be at the Blue Max in Ocala, and it's a great event. Absolutely. We actually covered the event this year in Model Aviation. David Hart did an article and photography for us. So if you go back, I can't tell you right off the top of my head, but earlier, real early this year, because the event was in January. So probably around the March, April timeframe of this year, we had an article about the Blue Max event. And I've known Scott Lee for many, many years. And he loves building World War One. And like I said, the first 2 events were at Fantasy of Flight, and I went to the first one. Sadly, it was so windy that only 2 airplanes flew the whole event. That only 2, and 1 crashed. And that just kind of, nobody else wanted to fly after that. And I get it, because these were all, like kits or scratch build airplanes. And I was actually going to get a ride in their Fiesler Storch, World War II observation plane, like the one that's in the museum. They fly it, and they were going to give me a ride so I could get aerial photos of the event, and they wouldn't even fly full scale. It was so windy, they wouldn't even fly full scale. So my one chance to get a ride in that aircraft, I missed out. But
man, that's a shame.
I know. I know it would have been really cool because that's obviously very historic airplane, and there's probably not many of them flying, at this point.
I
Uh,
wouldn't think so, but that is such an iconic airplane. It's just fascinating.
Yeah, I mean that museum is just amazing. I used to have an annual pass when I lived in Florida. I'd pay and get an annual pass, and I go there constantly, just because they would fly every day. The museum was open. They would fly one of the airplanes from the museum, and Kermit would pick. Sometimes he would fly it, and sometimes his chief test pilot would fly it. But they have the GB that Delmar Benjamin used to fly in air shows, and they have one of the well, actually, I think they have two of the biplanes from oh, what was that movie? Gosh, the World War One movie, the more recent one, um, Flyboys.
Oh,
And the chief test pilot was actually flies the biplane that was not a warplane, but he uses it to he flies the airplane to visit a French woman in the movie, and that actually belongs to the chief test pilot. And then I think the hero plane also is at Fantasy of Flight that Kermit owns. But yeah, it's incredible the collection of airplanes that he has there, and I think he has one of the aircraft from Indiana Jones. I mean, it's just an incredible collection. It's definitely worth visiting. I know for a while that it wasn't open to the public because he really wanted to focus on restoring aircraft and obviously they had a gift shop, they had a restaurant, and all that was taking time and resources, and they really wanted to focus more. But I mean, they have one of their hangars is engines, and they have Allison engines in the crate. And he told me Current Weeks told me that when you're dealing with like World War One and World War Two airplanes, or really old airplanes, that having something someone else needs is much more beneficial than having money. So if you want something that you need for a World War Two plane, then you're going to have to trade something that they need for a World War Two plane. It's they don't usually want money; they want the part they need, and they give you the part you need. So he has a whole hangar of just engines and parts that he can use to trade. And I mean, to see an Allison engine in a crate, I mean, that's just incredible. And he's very supportive of modeling, because right down the street he lets a club fly on his property,
oh, no
not right
kidding.
at the museum, but right down the street. So yeah, very neat that that event. And I know Balsa USA has attended that event, and um, so I took my father with me because my father lives in Bradenton, Florida. So I took him with me that first event. So Scott called me up earlier this week, and he personally invited me to possibly come, because it's the first year it's going to be in Ocala. And as it so turns out, my aunt and uncle live in Ocala. So if if it works out that I can go in mid-January, I'll even have a place to stay. So I might just make it. But anyway, we're really excited. I'm really excited. I think everybody's going to be excited to see another fighter face off and World War One. And it's going to be really interesting because, as you pointed out, Paul, neither one of you have ever designed World War One aircraft. Not to say that you're not capable, but like you said, it really opens it up because you're researching it more, and you're like, wow, I never realized there were so many options. And like when Derek and I talked, he was kind of leaning a little bit towards a monoplane, maybe, because he didn't, maybe, now he could change his mind, but he was not sure he wanted to deal with rigging and all that for a biplane. But then I was talking about the different monoplanes that like the D8 that he might consider. So there's just monoplane, biplane, triplane. I mean, you got three different wing configuration options.
Yeah, there's plenty of each.
Mm-hmm. So
Yeah,
it'll be
it's
really
gonna
neat.
be fun.
Yeah, it'll be really neat when you decide. Have you? And it's okay if you haven't, but just out of curiosity, have you the two of you determined a rough, either wingspan or scale you're going after, or is that not
Yeah, we have. Yeah, we're definitely looking at the 30-inch range.
okay?
Derek's been building a lot of stuff at 30-inch recently. We both started at 30, so it's an easy area for us to work in. Um, I think that's a pretty good fit. So yeah, that part's pretty well locked down.
Okay.
But beyond that, it's a clean slate. So yeah, we really got to figure out what we're going to do. The sooner the better, as far as I'm concerned. Derek's he's been super busy I'm a little bit less so. I don't have anything that I'm working on design wise right now. And the funny thing about all this design stuff is that for a while your project is all CAD. You're just doing the drawings and such, and then you get kind of burned out on that. And then, oh boy, now it's time to build. And then you're building, and then you kind of burn out on that for a while, and then you get into the finishing stage. And so you go through these ups and downs with the different phases of the project. But I've been out of the design phase for quite a bit, so now I'm eager to get back into that. So yeah, the sooner we can figure out what our subjects are, then get down to business.
So have you watched any World War One aviation movies for inspiration, like the Blue Max or Wings or any of those?
No, actually, I've been trying to lay off the TV as much as possible lately. Just not getting enough stuff done, and winter is upon us, and trying to get some projects done around the house and such. Actually, I've got a buddy that's a commercial fisherman, and I'm his mechanic. So there's a lot of work to be done on the boat, and that's got most of my spare time right now.
Oh, wow. So for working on his boat, does he give you any fish? Do you get to
get
eat
all
fish
the crab I can eat? Yeah. And,
oh, okay.
Yeah. Luckily, my wife really loves crab, so she thinks it's a great deal.
Yeah. Well, excellent. Like I say, I'm very excited about that. I'm excited about your next amphibian. Really appreciate you working with us on the P40. Appreciate you being on the show and sharing some more insight into that. Want to remind people that our next show, I believe, is December 20th. It's going to be on the screen. Yes, I'm right. December 20th will be the next show right before, obviously, the Christmas holiday. So look forward to seeing everyone then. Happy Thanksgiving in advance. Obviously, by the next time I talk to everyone that watches the show, we'll be past that. So happy Thanksgiving. And we'll see you in a month. Thanks, Paul.
You're welcome. Thanks, Jay.
All right. Take care.